Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's live stream. I'm Joshua Barnes, and I'm, as always, thrilled to be here. With me, I've got Al and Steve. Steve, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hello, friends of Furby. I always salute everyone with this sentence because it represents the constraints. And when I am around, Herbie is never missing in action. Oh.
Yeah, this is Al Shalloway. I'm the Director of Thought Leadership at Agile at Scale Programs at the PMI, and I'm kind of the host for tonight. For today, that just means I pick the topic. It doesn't mean anything other than that. We always just kind of do this in a roundtable format. But I have been thinking about this quite a lot.
Yeah, and before Al kicks the topic off, I just want to put out there that feel free to ask any questions, whether you're watching this on YouTube or the live stream on LinkedIn. That's part of why we're here, is to try and get questions and get some discussion going. So don't be shy.
Okay, so I guess I'll kick it off because actually I've been thinking about this a lot, and it starts from an insight I had about 10 days ago. Actually, Lanil DeBeer, an associate of mine, when Net Objective still existed, he worked there. He's a great consultant now, independent. And we coined the term we called a DINsight. Insight, like something we knew, but we had never, ever consciously stated. And as soon as it was stated, it was like, yeah, duh. Why did it take us so long to get there? And I had one of these about 10 days ago. And the insight was this. I was looking at some behavior of people where sometimes the behavior looks like it's command and control, a manager owning their thing. But I realized, this wasn't the command and control. What caused this? And I noticed that it was an issue of safety. And all of a sudden it just hit me that when people don't feel safe, they kind of pull back into their own work. If a team doesn't feel safe, the team pulls back into their own work, and that a lot of siloing that takes place. We're always talking about it being command and control and managers wanting to own their territory. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I'm saying another factor is there's this lack of safety. And then all of a sudden it hit me that when people feel less safe, they retrench. And when they feel more safe, they go out. And I think you could look in your own experience to validate whether that's true or not. But it seems true for me. I can't see where that hasn't happened. Not like if you feel unsafe, you always retract, but there's a tendency. So that's kind of the topic for this. It was that insight. But then I started looking at this, and I'm seeing how this issue of safety and work and the value stream, as most of you know, or well, if you don't, anyway, I'll tell you, I've shepherded this course that's actually getting up on the PMI website literally any day, called the Discipline Agile Value Stream Consultant Workshop. And it's based on basically how to improve value streams. That's the flow of work from the clients, the idea for the client, all the way through the group and then back in the area of knowledge work. And I've been seeing how the value stream, or a focus on the value stream, seems to work toward more safety. And I'm going to just throw out a couple of points quickly and then let Steve and Joshua comment on them, because some of the points are this. One of the interesting things about lean that I've been saying for years and has sometimes gotten me chastised, but I will stick to my guns on this one, is that lean tells us to focus on the work, that not the people. And the reason for that is the value stream as it goes through, as the work goes through, the value stream is something we can look at. And a lot of the way people work is based on the system they're in. So if I can implore people like, safety first or think or whatever, but if I put them in a bad system, that doesn't do any good. In fact, it kind of implies that they have something to do with the quality of their work, when in fact, and they do, but the quality of the work is greatly impacted by the quality of the system you're in. People say this all the time, systems eat, systems eat like strategy, or bad people. I mean, good people will be destroyed by a bad system. Bad systems affect people. In the software world, one of the classics is having test people offshore and the developers onshore. That time that causes the time delay causes lots of problems. So lean actually trusts and respects our people. Lean is actually more about educating people than anything else. It's about creating a context within which people can learn quickly and improve working with how they work with their teams. And so the idea that lean focuses on the workflow and on the work items is because the basis is we trust our people. We want to improve the systems they're in. And because I'm intimately familiar with value streams, the workshop's based on it, it occurred to me that, value streams, especially the way they're developed in the DAVSC, and Steve I'm sure will comment on this as well. TameFlow and the DAVSC workshop are the only two workshops I'm aware of where, or not workshops, methods, because the workshop is basically teaching a method that's based on the idea of Alexandrian patterns, where we look at a complex system and we look at the structure that the patterns create. And part of that structure is the relationship between the components, as Rasakoff talks about in a short video of his, that complex systems are really more about the relationships between the components than the components themselves. Alexander's work, which he talks about in A Timeless Way of Building, highly recommend it, talks about when you put a pattern in, or a pattern could be used to make a distinction between two areas of the system that are talking to each other, defines the relationship. And then there are patterns on how to work within that relationship. That's what most people think patterns are, solutions to recurring problems in a context. That context can be created by the pattern itself as you put it in and see how these two things right, like business and development in my world of knowledge work. So what's interesting is if safety causes us to pull back, the question is if you can look beyond the limits that the lack of safety calls us to push back. Now, I know cause and effect doesn't work bilaterally. It's not symmetric. But it still questions that, well, if you can make people see the better the relationship between people and the other people around you, or one team to another team, if you can create a bigger view, does that create safety? So that's a question. When does that work? So I know I'm flipping cause and effect. This is not a logical thing. I'm not saying absolutely it works all the time. But I do believe when you create the idea of team, you feel more safe because you're in a team. And I'll give one example, and then I'm going to pause and let Joshua and Steve talk. So I've been doing Scrum since, I guess it was 2000. I got into XP first in 99, but then I got into Scrum right after that. To be candid, I got into Scrum because I couldn't get people to pair program and test first. I loved it right away, but I had troubles. I had some companies do XP, but I couldn't. Scrum was easier because in those days, Agile was being picked up by where Scrum was designed for, which is cross-functional teams building products. And I had a lot of examples there. So I got into Scrum back then, and I observed in the daily stand-up, not everybody, in fact, not that many people, but culturally, there were a few cultures and people from, and this is not an aspersion on the culture. Cultures are different, not better. Is how I like to look at it. And you need to attend to the differences. But there were some people that I noticed from Southeast Asia, and when they were in the daily stand-up, and they would say, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm having troubles with, this is what I'm going to work on. The admitting a blockage for some cultures seemed to be extremely difficult. And I started studying culture a little bit more after that. And part of that is in some cultures, in Asia primarily, people have a very strong affinity to the people around them. So actually, maybe this is a good thing in my mind, because I think that affinity is good. And if they're failing, they're letting their teammates down. And they're also not good because it's a kind of failure. It's kind of a saving face type thing. And I can remember this one woman, it was like she could almost not say that she was blocked. It was such a emotional confront to her. And whether it was cultural or not, I actually think it was, because I saw this pattern there. But people who identify with their work, or people identify losing face when their work's not going, this is generally true. I think it gets worse in some places. Again, not a bad thing. It's got positive aspects, just different. And I remember what we tried to do. We tried doing things like, we'd say, oh, say you failed, and then everybody would clap and cheer and try to get over the safety issue. See, she didn't feel safe saying it. And I've seen people talking about courage. Courage is one of the values of Scrum. And I was actually thinking about that. I think a process that requires you to have courage is actually not that great, because people are as courageous as they are. What you want to do is create safety. And in Kanban, we actually did something different, because Kanban is more about flow and the holistic part of it. And our daily stand-ups were, we'd walk the board. Well, here's what we're working on. Here's what is in our way. Here's what we're going to do. Even if it was one person working on it, you'd still say, this is what we're doing. You talk about it as a team. And I never, ever saw anybody be afraid of that, because it was the team. It wasn't me. Even if I'm the only one working on it, it wasn't me, it's the team. It's that kind of ownership. So there is this relationship between belonging to a team and safety. And I do believe there's a cultural aspect. And maybe I didn't need to mention that, because like I said, to me, it's not a good or a bad, but I think that sometimes we tend to be very self-centered ourselves. Like Americans, we're obviously the smartest, most intelligent. We know how to do things, people on the planet. And that's said tongue in cheek, because that's obviously BS. But if we think that's the normal and we're only looking at that normal, and that's a problem too. And that is a kind of pulling in and describing ourselves as one way. And that's another aspect. So there are lots of aspects here. I've actually only talked a couple of them, but I'm going to pause because it's been long enough. And I'm curious what Joshua or Steve have to say.
Yeah, I'll say, yeah, it's often a problem and a challenge to help overcome. I mean, you kind of started off with kind of painting a picture of what we see a lot of times on teams that are beginning their agile journey. And let's face it, a lot of them are development teams, right? Most of the time, it's IT teams, and a lot of times they're made up of people that are going to have a certain number of introverts, right? So they're already not necessarily that comfortable. And so as we're seeing some progress right at the team level, and we might see some things that they're not always getting all the work they committed to being done, or all the work that they forecasted they could get done. And part of it's because they don't want to say no, right? They're not comfortable enough when work's being pushed on them, whether it's their manager, a different team, somebody who's empowered because of their position or empowered because of the perception of their role in the organization or what have you. And so a lot of the behaviors that we see come from them not being in a safe, comfortable position to either say no or to do something that they know might be a better way.
Yeah, I like that.
Well, very interesting topic, and with many ramifications in field of different national cultures and individual psychology, personalities. Joshua just mentioned introverts, and this industry by nature is full of introverts. Believe it or not, I'm an introvert, but look here, I'm at the camera, right? So.
Well, Al used to say he was an introvert as well.
I've worked on it.
I've never been an introvert.
We're in the show business, So there are many points, but one point that you said at the beginning, Al, is quite key. It's that the focus, the point of attention should never be an individual, not even a team, but should be the work. And this also creates a bit of a conundrum, because in the pursuit of, say, psychological safety, what is at the center? It's the individual. So we start to see that there might be some conflicting priorities between the intent of creating psychological safety and focusing on the work, and on the other side trying to shield the individual. So we need to find a way to still have all those elements, Deming respect for people. And one of the pillars of TOC is people are good. And in TameFlow, I always put the individual at the center of all what I do. So the individual needs come before anything else. Yet there is this problem, especially in traversing cultures, and with a global remote setting we have, it's very easy. So you have teams that span the world. So a couple of things. I'll start with Joshua's last point. Now, with estimations, people don't want to say no because they might also be pointed out, oh, you're not a team player. So it creates the opposite effect, and that's what I counter with probabilistic forecasting. Just forget estimation. Engineers love it. They don't have to expose themselves, and yet you get more precise, more reliable forecasts. So that's now a whole category of interactions that we can remove and let the work do the speaking. We don't ask people to expose themselves. Another one, when you mentioned that example with that example with people from Southeast Asia and the culture there of the fear of losing face. Well, that's a huge one. I've also worked with teams in India, and there is this. There is a power distance factor, which is always difficult. They always say, respect their boss more than almost more than reality, which creates a problem because you're losing sight of the actual elements that are affecting the whole system. So how do you avoid that fear of losing face? Well, what I do is that I let the work speak with what I call the work execution signals. So the blockages are detected by the data that the work flowing through the system is generating. So, for instance, in TameFlow, we do not do stand-ups. We avoid estimations, and we do not do stand-ups. So how does it work? Well, it's the notion of management by exception. When the work gives this signal, you know that there is a problem. And then there is the working with the attitudes, the behaviors. When you have a problem, you swarm. The whole team, even the whole organization comes together. It's the notion of the constraint. And where is Furby? Everyone comes together on that one. So the work execution signal is very powerful because it saves a lot of time in unnecessary meetings, the stand-ups. And when they are needed, they are extremely focused, extremely specific. And the focus is on the problem. It's not on the person who was holding the problem at that moment. And that problem is owned by the team or the organizational unit that has control of what is going on. It changes the perspective. We are facing a problem. And still, we must also not forget that because TOC has this perspective that the constraint is always, now we'll use like an ugly word, quote, quote, a resource. It's a technical term. Now it means the element that is executing the work. It can be a person, it can be a machine. It's project management terminology. But in knowledge work, it's a person. So it's a human being. And therefore, even if we are focusing on the work, constraints management forces you to have attention for human beings. How do you resolve this? And this is where I go back to the source, the story of Furby, where I give like my TameFlow interpretation of the story of Furby. I think I said this another time, but it's good repeating, where the 5 focusing steps can really be reframed. And what happens is then that when the team like stops and waits for Herbie, well, the notion there is we leave no man behind alone in the wood. We always care for those who are the weakest. And when we do the story when the scouts share the load of Furby, well, we always help one another. So you start to build that culture that it's not a matter of pointing out someone to blame. It's finding those who are having difficulties and problems, and you're there to help. So the attention is given not because we want to find fault, but because we want to help those who are in difficulty. this changes the culture, even in cultures with high power distance factors, or this notion of losing face. If you start framing this, no, this is a situation of need that needs to be addressed. Like, say, if you're crossing a river and someone takes a false step and starts having difficulties and is drowning, what do? Do you stand there and just watch because it's not your problem, or do you go in and help? So if it's a team, you go in and help, of course. So we use that imagery. Now, if there is a difficulty, we are all there together to help that person. We leave no one alone in the woods, and therefore we can reconcile the technicalities of constraints management in the workflow that's identified, the bottleneck and all this stuff, with what is being obviously reflected on the human interaction side of managing that situation. So create the awareness that there is no dishonor in being Herbie. I am Herbie now. Tomorrow can be Joshua. The day after, it's Al. Herbie can be any one of us. Even the strongest can have an injury. Take a wrong step, and your foot is gone, and all of a sudden the strongest Boy Scout is the last one. So we are all there to help whoever is the weakness, the weakest at the moment in the context. That creates a culture to address these issues.
Well, Steve, you bring up so many good things here. I'm going to try to pull out a few things, but I realize this topic is also a great example of that. Dr. Goldratt did not write the book called The Theory of Bottlenecks. He wrote a book called The Theory of Constraints. And when you talk about Herbie, it's all too easy to get into the Herbie was a bottleneck. And in that case, sometimes constraints show up as bottlenecks. So that's true. And because he talked about it in manufacturing, and manufacturing has an assembly line and bottlenecks occur. But think about a constraint of fear in an organization. That's a constraint. It's not a bottleneck. It might cause bottlenecks. It might cause other things, but the constraint is here. So culture can be a constraint or not. Not all companies have cultures that are constraints. I've been in a lot of cultures, a lot of companies, where the culture was one of trying new things, and it was really wonderful to go in there. I mean, I remember one company I worked with, they were, I don't know, I wouldn't say they were really messed up, but they had a lot of problems. But they had this culture of liking change and trying things. And we did some amazing work with them. And I would always give them the credit for it. Yeah, we got the idea of a couple of bold things to do, but to be candid, we were pushed into it too because they wanted to change and they were going faster than we thought possible. But then they pulled it off. But this thing about everybody can be Herbie, and I'm thinking somewhat again about some of the values in the Scrum Guide, where respect is another one. And yet, and it's a good one. It's actually a good one. And we do have to have respect, earn it, and kind of demand it. But that's one of the problems I know I have, and I know a lot of other people have, of respecting myself, that I'll do something wrong. Like I was working on something this morning, and the whole time I was telling myself, "Ali, why are you doing it this way? This is all wrong." And and my brain is going crazy like that. And then I said, "Al, shut up. Just do it. Don't stop talking about how bad you're doing it. Just do it." And actually, it turned out the way I did it was perfect. It was really smart. In the middle of it, it didn't look smart, but it ended up being just the right way to go. And so while all that crap was going on in my head, I wasn't showing myself much respect. So respect is this accepting us as we are, regardless of what we are. And it doesn't, I'm not saying it gives you carte blanche to do bad things. I'm saying if people are doing their best they can, then they deserve respect. And this thing about it hit me that, like, there's a lot when I watch conversations on Twitter and LinkedIn, it's interesting to see where people are coming from. One of the new in vogues now is there's root cause analysis is a waste of time. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I once, with 3 hours of root cause analysis, helped the company improve their productivity by 20%. This is a 100-person development organization. Not kidding. 3 hours root cause analysis, 20% improvement in productivity. We just cut out 20% of the work they had to do. It was brilliant. And It wasn't me brilliant. We did value stream mapping, 5 whys. It was pretty obvious what was going on, but nobody saw it beforehand. I've done that with other companies, not quite as dramatic as that. But yet, when you hear people talk and you talk about root cause analysis, I think there are 2 reasons I hear all this. One is this whole, well, we can't figure it out because we're in complex systems, which is kind of a defeatist attitude I don't ascribe to. Again, Goldratt's from the choice, inherent simplicity, which I won't go off to now. But the other one is people talk about root cause analysis is there to lay blame. Well, not everybody does that. Lean doesn't do root cause analysis to lay blame. It's there to look at what's wrong with the system, and people are at the effect of that. So it's interesting when a lot of the things we talk about and kind of push back on, I think are indicators that we're really not respecting people as much as we should. Because if we do root cause analysis and we respect people, where I come from with it, I'm not looking for the one-offs. I'm not looking for the guy who had a bad day and he was that 5% that caused the problem himself. I'm looking for the system error that's causing it. That's the root. That's why we were able to save so much. We discovered something that was inherent in the way the system was working. Yeah, we could point blame. I've written this up too. But we could point blame at the salespeople for doing the thing wrong. But I couldn't. If I was a salesperson, I'd have been doing what they were doing because of the way their compensation was done. They were incentivized to do the thing that was causing the problem. So when you take a systems thinking approach and you truly respect people, what you recognize is you stop looking for faults in people and you start looking for how the system can be improved. And yet we in the agile space, I shouldn't say we, because the 3 of us here, I know we spend a lot of time looking at this. Like I say, DAVSC and TameFlow is very much based on systems thinking. But if you step back, and I actually invite any listener to do this, step back. And when you hear dialogue, ask where they're looking. Are they looking at blaming people, or are they looking at what's causing the system? And now a lot of times people don't think about the system, because if you're going to talk about the system, you have to understand something about how a system works. And a large community in the agile space doesn't really believe in theories. I mean, they say they do, but I mean, you don't hear it professed. They believe in empiricism. Well, sure, I believe in empiricism too. Evidence beats theory. But do you really have a theory as to why what's happening is happening? Do you have a theory on what you're trying to do and why, instead of the how? So many of the agile frameworks are more about how. Do this, do this, do this, and you'll get the results. And if you don't do this, you're not doing your thing. So I think that to get into systems thinking, you truly need to start getting into theory more. And once you understand the system, you can drive out fear, not by blaming the system. Don't be Bart Simpson's saying the system made me do it. That's not what I'm talking about. But how to improve the system and how to respect people. Yeah, that's enough for me.
Oh yeah. So one thing that came to mind just while we were talking about this that I hadn't really thought about as I was thinking through this earlier today was, we're describing a lot of situations where there are constraints because people don't feel safe. And it's a lot of times you look at employees of organizations and the culture that's there, but a lot of times the constraints, again, almost my entire career, I've spent it as being a consultant, going into being an external person. And I can say that there are plenty of times where as an external person, you don't feel very safe, and so there are times where I've been a little more outspoken because there are things you want to bring attention to or things that we want to see improvements in. But I'll see that there are other, very experienced consultants that may have been at a customer for quite some time. And they're just like, I don't want to lose this engagement, right? Or contractors, right? Contractors sometimes aren't necessarily seen the same as employees. So a lot of times that's the constraint as well. We might be able to see better results or more swift progress. But it's not just the employee culture, it's the people that they're bringing in to help actually support what they're trying to achieve. So that's another area that I think requires shining the light on a little bit more.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. Safety as a consultant and safety as a contractor. And I'll tell you where courage is required. If you're a consultant or a contractor and you're there to tell people the truth, then you do need courage.
You do.
So I'm not saying courage isn't good. I'm sorry, what?
You at least need to also, have some tact in the way you might be delivering some of these messages.
Yeah.
That's your role, or that's why you're there, is to bring awareness to these things.
That's right. You're often there to bring news that they don't want to hear, and
right. Whether they know it or not.
Yeah. And man, I fortunately learned a few lessons like that early. And I just learned that you have to do that, and you'll lose clients at times. But if you don't, although I don't know if I ever did lose a client, I was afraid of losing a client. I've heard of some very smart people who lost clients because they told the truth. And I was, one in particular, one of my heroes, admitted that, well, he didn't quite know what the company needed to do. They needed to try a few things and try it out and discover it. And the executive who brought him in said, well, why should I pay a consultant some who doesn't know what to do? I mean, he was right, of course. Nobody would know what to do. There are times you have to kind of discover and go, but the moment you start covering things up, you can't get to the truth. It's not a slippery slope. It's more like a cliff, if you ask me.
Yeah.
It's slippery for a little while, then it's off a cliff. The good news is that you want clients who truly want to make a change. And I have learned that if I can't speak the truth to the clients, I'd rather go somewhere else anyway.
Right.
But anyway, that fear. I guess is an interesting thing, that there is a difference in fear whether you're an employee, a contractor, a consultant. And I guess what I'm talking about with the safety bit is really more about individuals working in an organization, and that could be an FTE or a contractor. Mm-hmm. And contractors probably feel the fear even more. But employees in a lot of companies, it's a lot easier for them to just retrench all the way, because they'll be safe in their, it's like the vision is my cats go under the bed when they get afraid of things. So don't be a cat under the bed is my advice.
So I think that there are some other facets to this conversation. The root cause analysis thing. It's a huge component of what I do with TeamFlow. Now, Al, you said something that there is this movement. I haven't seen it. I'm not that active as you are on Twitter and LinkedIn, so I'm not participating in all.
I don't know if anybody's as active as Al is.
Well,
I don't know if anyone's as active as Al.
No, he's
I've been on a little pause the last week, but
but no, what you said, that there is this sort of movement against the root cause analysis, because the intent of root cause analysis is to lay blame. Now, there are companies where there is a blame culture, or even entire national cultures which are constructed on scapegoats and finding someone to blame. No doubt about that.
Absolutely.
But the interesting question is, why would someone come to that conclusion that root cause analysis is there to find blame? And this maybe goes back to these cultures that develop around a movement. Take Scrum. I know things have changed, but originally they had the infamous, the thing I really hate, the chicken and pig story, which creates like a detachment between management and the team. The poor little team needs to be protected against the nasty managers. Now, that story has been taken away because it's not politically correct, obviously. But the thinking, the culture is still there, that there is like a conflict between management and the, let's say, executors, the workers, the people on the ground. Such a situation cannot sustain knowledge work. Knowledge work needs necessarily a culture of trust. So if you have like that idea that we have trust within our team, but no managers, they are there to exercise command and control, to micromanage, to do root cause analysis for placing blame, well, then you need to question if you are really part of a knowledge work organization, or if there are deeper reasons why you feel that there is this detachment. So yes, blame cultures exist. They are a dysfunction, but also these cultures that necessarily want to see the bad guy, that necessarily want to see someone who is there to create damage, to attribute blame when maybe they have not any of that intention, are just as dysfunctional. So the question is, now what do we do about that? Because it's easy to pinpoint a manager that is driven by this blame mindsets and micromanaging. But when you have a whole culture of a whole, let's say, professional category that is thinking in these terms and don't see the advantages of an organization that, in Goldratt's terms, is like harmonious, where all the parts are working in harmony one with the other, including the managers. Why? Because the managers can be the Herbies, and often they are. Management attention is limited. So the speed of decision making, the quantity of decision making is limited by the brains of the managers, these strategic big decisions. And if you accept that they can be the Herbie, would you not stand behind the statements we did before? We help Herbie. We don't leave Herbie alone in the woods.
I love
so that. This goes both ways. If you start reasoning in now, who is the Herbie, and we set out to help Herbie, well, yes, no, it can be the latest junior hire who just makes disasters because he doesn't know, but it can also be the CEO who just makes disaster because attention is overloaded. And that's where we still need the field that I think we are about acting in. It's not just knowledge work. It's, as Bob Marshall says, it's collaborative knowledge work. We can't produce knowledge today unless we're collaborating. And that is inclusive, from the CEO to the latest junior hire. And whenever I hear these statements that, oh, yes, managers, they are from another era, the Tayloristic mindset. So no, you're not getting it. That's not what is happening. There is a deeper detachment in terms of how the different parts are looking one onto the other. And just that fact, say, oh, managers, they have a Tayloristic mindset. If only they had the illumination, enlightenment of agile, everything would be good. Well, isn't that attributing blame? You're blaming them for something that maybe they don't have, but you're not seeing the world from their perspective. So, this must be a very open and inclusive discourse that respects all people, from the latest junior hires to the senior ones to the top managers.
You said two things that I want to unpack because they're very profound. And one of them is an opening maybe into something else. So I remember writing a blog, I don't know, a long time ago, 10, 15 years ago. And I entitled it, Managers Are People Too. And I don't think it's out there now. I think it was on an old blog roll that's not active. I'll have to dig through my archives and type it up. And what I meant was this whole thing you just said about how we blame managers for blaming people. But we're not respectful of managers. The whole chicken and pigs was a disrespectful thing. And that managers aren't committed. Well, of course they're committed. I mean, some aren't, but some developers aren't committed. I mean, I think it goes both ways. So there's this, when we talk about respect, it's not just respect those people we want to. It's respect everybody, at least give them the opportunity to earn it. Now, one thing, though, you said that I think is profound, and I think I've seen this over and over again. When you ask, why is it that, why do we have this propensity to kind of, like, where did this root cause analysis idea that it's bad come from? Well, I see this all the time. Not just root cause analysis, but with other things. Like, I remember, we tend to go to absolutes. Don Reinhardt had said something funny once at a conference we were both at, and we were kind of kibitzing in the back of the room. I've mentioned this before, where, I don't know, it was right after Kanban had come out for a couple of years. So there were some people who were talking about Kanban and some people were talking about Scrum, or they had two different views, and it was absolute both ways. And he looked at me and said, these people have been around zeros and ones too long. And I laughed because I was actually thinking the same thing. And when you look at conversations and you notice that it's 0 or 1, like root cause analysis is bad or managers are bad, you know, what you end up with, or you can't make predictions in systems. Well, I can see constraints in many systems right away and make accurate predictions. Maybe not micro predictions, maybe not whether it'll be heads or tails, but that, you know, generally what's going to happen. That what we want to do is, when you said that, it made me think, why is it that people are so uncomfortable? Now, we know cognitive bias, so they have what I've been describing as their cognitive biases, so that's clear. But I think it goes deeper than that, and it's something I've seen for myself happen a few times. I will say I've learned how to get past it. But when you challenge something, or something you know is challenged, it's terrifying, especially if your livelihood is based on it. Upton Sinclair in The Jungle once said, a man, what did he say? He said, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon him not understanding it. And the reason is because it comes up with fear. And I can remember 2, 3, 4 times, and when I was CEO of Net Objectives, where I would discover something and I literally say, oh, fuck, excuse my language. But that's what I said. Oh, crap. If this is true, I've got to start all over. It's like, oh my God, this thing I built 1 or 2 of our courses on is means that I'm wrong and I got to start over. And I remember the first time that happened, it terrified me. I was like, I just built this whole curriculum and it was like flawed. And it took me a few months to correct it and rebuild things, and that worked. And then the next time it happened, it was like a little easier because I'd experienced it once before. But I think one way maybe is to notice if we're absolutes about anything, except for the statement I'm about to make. It's probably not a good idea. You know, because I see that a lot. And I think it's that absolutism that makes it feel, the reason we do that is because it makes us comfortable to know we know something. And yet, really, we don't know a lot of stuff for certainty at all. And we have to accept that even though it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, so, you know, something that you both have said now, or my take on that is, you know, it kind of, this respect and understanding and everybody being safe goes both ways, right? It is not just management providing a safe place or a safe, comfortable environment for, you know, the workers to do their thing. Because a lot of times managers haven't been trained, or they don't understand what we're trying to get the teams to do. Right. We were just, you know, we've recently been talking about some of the, you know, transformation roadmaps and some of the, you know, some things we might be seeing in that. And sure, we always want to see, you know, leadership is going to be trained, and, you know, management's going to be trained so that they understand some of how these changes are going to have impacts, as well as what's going to be expected, and hopefully what we're going to get, you know, as we move to new things. But if they don't understand it, then we really can't also expect them to change their perspective on things when they don't have a basis for that. Right. So that's I guess, yeah, you know, everybody is in this.
Well, that's one of the key challenges there, and the way I approach it, not in what you're saying, it's all right, and I would say, quoting the title of one of Goldratt's book, it's necessary but not sufficient. The understanding from top management of, as you said, what we are trying to do,
right,
is obviously necessary. Otherwise, they might be opposing, but it's not sufficient. They must also want it. So that's where you have like the psychological element. And I work a lot with this notion of enlightened self-interest, and I often misunderstood, because when I use the word enlightenment, people think about that in hallelujah terms, like a religious enlightenment. I see it more like an intellectual enlightenment, more like the Archimedes eureka. Yes, I understand. So what we need to do is as I say, work with the mental models, the perspectives that, well, actually all players, not only the managers, but in this case, the managers, the perspectives that they hold on how the world is working, their deep beliefs of how things are connected one to another, and how reality is.
Mm-hmm.
The key moment is when you explain some of these counterintuitive things, like, for instance, limiting work in process. What, are you crazy? We have so much things to do, right? If you can frame that in terms of what is the interest of the manager, well, typically a manager is there to care for the profitability. The higher up you go in the hierarchy, the more important the financial aspects become. So can you show that by limiting work in process, you will be making a greater profit? There you're tickling their self-interest. And if you give them the moment of, aha, eureka, yes, I see it, I want it, okay, then it's game, because they have understood. The understanding gave the enlightenment gave like the desire, the I want to do it. Then you have not only the support, but you have the full buy-in. They will come to you, say, let's do it now, immediately. I want it. So I think that is the secret sauce. And I work a lot with these mental models that create these moments of change of perspective, of deeper insights. It's now the first episode I was a host with the Egg of Columbus, right? It's exactly that thing, that unless you're there as an eye opener, it's obvious in hindsight, but it's not self-evident from the outset. So why should I limit work in process? It's not at all evident. You have to explain it. Maybe you have to bring them into a simulation. But when they get it, aha, I see. It's good for me. I want it. And the rest is easy.
Yeah, I want to close at least my part, not close the talk, because there'll still be some time. There are three things I realize I've been wanting to talk about, and one is actually was supposed to be part of this topic, and I had actually remembered that, and then Sendel sent a note, which I was glad he had. I'll just read what he asked. Psychological safety is difficult to achieve and maintain. It only takes a drop of poison. Can you summarize your thoughts on how value streams can lower fear? So that was actually one of the connections I wanted to make that I hadn't done yet. The thing about value streams, it depends how you look at them. But I mentioned how Russ Aikoff talks about systems being more about the relationships between the components. And if you look at what value streams are, value streams is the flow of work from the original concept on behalf of the customer as it winds its way through the organization and back to the customer. And it's usually not done by just a one group. This is one of, I think, the fallacies of being team-centric with things, is that, well, there's a lot that takes place before the team and a lot that takes place after the team. And in a big company, the bigger you get, the more winding through and the more relationships there are. What's the relationship between business and development, between executives and product managers and product owners and teams and DevOps, or the ops, using DevOps? DevOps is a relationship mechanism in many ways, is how I think about it. So what the value stream does, the value stream itself doesn't do anything. But using value streams, the accurate question is using value streams. This is what was meant. Using value streams helps lower fear because it enables you to see the relationships between the people involved. At Net Objectives, many years ago, I don't know exactly when, but at least 10 years ago, we came up with what we called guardrails, the guardrail system. And it was 6 or 7 agreements that we would make amongst everybody. Like, we're going to do what adds business value. So it wasn't about a local optimization. It was what helped the entire organization. And we had 6 or 7 of these. I don't remember the exact ones we used there, but that got incorporated into Disciplined Agile's promises and principles. And one of the principles or promises is, let's create psychological safety. That's an agreement. DA actually can be related and driven down to all the promises and the agreements and a few principles. And everything stems from that. Now, we've got hundreds of practices and things like that. But DA is really about being pragmatic, about creating value. It's an agreement amongst ourselves. It's not an agreement to follow a framework or follow something. See, that's, to me, that's not about relationship. Relationship is when the three of us make agreements with each other, like we'll be respectful in these conversations. And we work differently with those kind of agreements. Value streams make those, not value streams, looking at value streams makes those more evident what those relationships are. One of the things about effective value streams is visibility of work and workflow and how people are doing the work. I don't see this a lot. I know transparency and all that's a value of Scrum, and we have transparency of the work. There's not a lot of transparency in how the work's being done. In fact, there's been, remember years ago, Ken actually decried explicit workflow policies, whereas I think they're really good. You don't stick to them, you don't follow them. They're just agreements. Like, hey, well, this is how we're going to work together. Like definition of ready. I get into trouble with this all the time. Oh, that's a phase gate thing. No, it isn't. It's just we're agreeing. What does it mean before we start working on something? And part of that agreement can be, well, whenever I feel like it. Okay, our definition of ready is it's always ready. Or it could be our definition of ready is the product owner has said it's ready or whatever, but it's an agreement. It's making it explicit. So I think value streams help because it talks about the relationships between the people and about making things visible. Now, there's another thing. I'll try to be quick because I got two more things. There's another premise of lean, and I'm not saying it's 100% true because I don't think it is 100% true, but it's very powerful, and it comes from a book called Creating a Lean Culture, Tools to Sustain Lean Conversions. And I don't necessarily recommend the book if you have difficulty transposing something from one field to the next, because this is definitely in the manufacturing arena. But if you look underneath it in the principles, it's a very powerful book. And I'm going to read a little bit of this. He says, culture is important, but changing it directly is not possible. Culture is no more likely a target than the air we breathe. It is not something to target for change. Culture is an idea arising from experience. Our idea of culture of a place or organization is a result of what we experience there. A company's culture is a result of its management system. So, consider, I'm going to pause from what we're reading. Like when we talk about an unsafe culture, look to see what happened. Somebody said something, somebody was late or whatever, and they got attacked. Well, that's an unsafe culture because of how things are working. So culture, coming back to what he says, culture is critical, and to change it, you have to change your method of collaboration. Focus your management system on targets you can see, such as leaders' behavior, specific expectations, tools, and routine practices. Lean production systems make this easier because they emphasize explicitly defined agreements and use visual controls to make the work and agreements visible. Visual controls are not information radiators. They're a special type, rather. They're the type where you also explain the workflow and what you're trying to get. Okay, be really quick on the other two because I realized there was one other thing. Deming said something very important. So Deming has 14 points of management, and number 18 is drive out fear. Drive out fear so that everyone can work effectively for the company. Management's role has a lot to do with driving out fear. Now, a lot of people say management's role is creating the fear. Okay, great. If they created the fear, let them drive it out. Okay. The last thing is just a reference. I'm not going to talk about this except read the 5 things. So I was just introduced to David Rock's SCARF approach. That's SCARF. Attend to status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. You can just Google it. David Rock SCARF. Don't Google SCARF or you'll have to find something that you'll want to buy or you'll want to buy for your wife. But David Rock SCARF is really good. And I think we need to start attending to safety and not just assume it's there and not just blame management, but look at how does the system cause it or hurt it. Okay, so I'm done. I'm going to let Joshua and Steve kind of wrap up how they want to. Thanks for being here, though, for everybody who's listening. I hope this was useful.
Yeah, I'm just going to, I'll make mine also really quick. I'm going to pull up something here that Valentin wrote because, yeah, I mean, this was one of the things that I was planning to kind of work in as well. It's just how when we start looking at value streams and we start looking at dependencies across products that, multiple teams are now taking a part in delivering. And we've got more awareness of that. We can hopefully do things differently. We can sequence the work and have that type of collaboration, which tends to then make things go better, you can start having a more safer environment, and everybody's a little bit more comfortable. So I thought what Valentin, what you wrote, was a good one to add. And I'll say thank you also to everybody in attendance today, whether you're here live or anybody that's watching this on replay. And I'll turn it over to you, Steve.
Remember, Herbie's your friend, and we never leave him alone in the wood, and we share all the load. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. See you next time.